This Lil Durk trial is getting crazier and crazier. Every day seems like a new twist, new turn. There's a lot of updates here, and I want to give it straight to y'all. One of the biggest lessons we can learn from this whole thing is that it really seems like you cannot trust people, at least the people you grew up with, right? Maybe you can trust family, but when it comes to friends, so unfortunately, Little Durk has been told on, right? The case is still going. I'm gonna give you guys the latest information. I'm gonna talk about King Von's latest words, or I'm sorry, his last words that he said before he passed away, allegedly, and then things what's going on with the case. So first of all, for those who don't know, I want to go and start a little bit from the beginning, and then we're gonna go into piece by piece, and then look what other commentators got to say about this. Um, but according to prosecutors, the unaliving was revenge for another. I'm sorry, the shooting was revenge for another unaliving that happened on Chicago based rapper Davon Bennett, better known as King Von, a friend of Little Durk. So in 2020, Rondo and Von got into a fist fight in Atlanta. A member of Rondo's entourage pulled out a weapon and he fired upon King Von. Since then, some people say the police did it, some people say it was them, right? It's kind of a he say, she say thing. But since then, people have been irritating Little Durk in the comment section, like, "What are you doing? Are you gonna get revenge?" Blah blah blah. And allegedly, he took it into his own hands to actually do that. So it all started allegedly with this clip here. This is what people are saying really ignited it. He saw the comment section, and then you got videos like this. He sat down with DJ Academics, who, by the way, DJ Academics is a figure in hip hop. He does kind of similar to like what I'm doing right now. At least that's how he got his start. You know, may know his channel, War in Chirac, etc. But the gentleman to the left, for those who don't know, with the blue shirt, is Little Durk. I'm sorry, the blue hat is Little Durk. Now, if you see his hat says D thing on it, that's his brother. But listen to this.
You get triggered by the
Beat the
slide.
shit out of this little ass, man. What are you
You get
talking
triggered
about?
by the slide for Vaughn comments. Still, I don't know if people still say it. They used to say it, but you also mentioned a song. They be like, they be saying slide for Vaughn. I think they trolling me. Yo, by the way, them songs is fire. I ain't gonna lie.
For some reason, I just don't see them comments no more. For some odd reason. I don't know. Might be the water. You be seeing them comments a lot?
They kind of chilled out a little bit.
I wonder why. Yeah, though.
So people are saying that's the clip that really alerted people, right? Because he's saying like, "Yo, I don't see those comments no more." And when I first seen this clip, I didn't catch it, but later on, people pointed out to me, said that's an indirect way of saying, "Hey, you know." But we're gonna get to the latest updates with the trial itself. I do want to give some quick opening statements and then show where I got some of my information from. So there's a page called mynewsla.com, right? And it talks about some of the opening statements, things that's going on with the case. You guys can refer to this. You know, it talks about how Little Durk allegedly financed the unaliving of this victim, right? So that's the whole theory. But since that's happened, you'll be amazed that some people have already pleaded guilty. So there's people in the trial itself that have pleaded guilty and they said, okay, we participated in this because they already have the vehicle showing that it's going to Little Durk's house. They already have proof that a group of people rented a vehicle. They got proof of them. They got surveillance footage of them going to the local store, buying ski masks, doing all this stuff, buying ammunition, right? They got trackers in the vehicle, seeing where they're at. They got cameras. I mean, come on, it's LA, broad daylight. So you know there's cameras. You seen what happened in Nipsey, right? They got the dude on camera. So let's go ahead and listen to this, see what the boy Trap Laura Ross has to say, right?
And there was a lot of really big information that just came out. Now I'm going to do a bunch of breakdowns of all the information, but I'm going to hit you with the craziest piece of information that came up first. I could not believe it. They brought up WAC 100 and 6ix9ine in Durk's hearing. Now this is insane. So they were basically arguing over a certain exhibit and like whether or not it should be allowed to be used. And they pretty much said that there was a podcast clip of the 6ix9ine and Wack 100 interview that they basically wanted to use. The defense for Durk was fighting for it not to be included, and this is what's crazy. Now look, before I get attacked, before I get in any trouble, okay, I'm not saying Wack 100's a snitch or that he's cooperating or that he's part of this case. Same goes for 6ix9ine. 6ix9ine's not cooperating against Durk. He's not part of the case, but the interview between Wack 100 and 6ix9ine was brought up. The feds are planning to use it as evidence of what, you might ask? They're saying that it is evidence that this podcast where 6ix9ine was talking his shit against Durk, talking about, yeah, slide for Von. You said that dudes were going to slide. If I die, we're boosting the rate. Dudes are going to slide every day. All of that stuff. They're basically saying that this was evidence that this podcast blew up. It was one of the biggest aspects of the Slide for Von campaign. The feds literally just said it themselves that 6ix9ine and Wack 100 on that podcast, that was like the all-star team of the Slide for Von campaign. They're saying that people, they were basically saying that, they said that a confidential witness.
They said this, they said that. So the whole thing is like hearsay, right? They have a group of people who admitted to it. Now their whole thing is they're trying to get those people to blame Durk. So they said those people are like, hey, Durk paid me to do X, Y, Z. They have the vehicle going to Durk's house. Now there's the concept of, can you prove that he paid you, right? So that's what we're getting towards now. There's no current wires or anything like that, but they're saying, hey, cash may have been exchanged. But listen to what this creator has to say.
He asked why Grant had let him get shot. That question directed at Grant and his close associate.
I just want to rewind that a little bit. So King Von's allegedly last word. So there's this guy right here. And King Von allegedly asked him. By the way, that's OTF jam. I don't know why they got OTF Vonnie in there. But his alleged last words were, why'd you let this happen to me?
Associate and cousin, and asked a question that the defense says the jury needs to sit with. He asked why Grant had let him get shot. That question, directed at Grant and Von's final moments, became the foundation of one of the most strategically significant arguments Lil Durk's defense team has made throughout this entire trial. The reason that question matters is what the defense has built around it. They have argued that Von and Grant were not simply associates or label connections. They lived together. They shared a joint bank account. Their relationship was intimate in the way that only people who have genuinely trusted each other completely can claim. And in that context, Von's final question was not a random dying statement. According to the defense, it was a direct accusation, a moment where Von, in his last moments, pointed toward Grant and assigned responsibility. Whether you interpret that as an accusation of cowardice, a statement about positioning during the shooting, or something more specific, the defense wants the jury thinking about Grant's relationship to that night in a way that prosecutors have not framed it. And the reason that framing matters so much is that Kayvon Grant is one of the central cooperating witnesses in this federal case. He has pleaded guilty and agreed to testify for the prosecution against Lil Durk. So the defense...
Keep that in mind. Keep that in mind. He's agreed to testify.
Is doing something very deliberate here. They are using King Von's own final words to plant a seed of doubt about the credibility and motives of one of the government's most important witnesses. If the jury questions Grant, even slightly, it affects the weight they give to everything he tells them about the alleged murder-for-hire operation. That is not an accident. That is precision legal strategy wrapped around one of the most emotionally devastating moments in this entire story. Now here's how that single night in 2020 connects directly to why Lil Durk is sitting in a federal courtroom in Los Angeles right now. The government's entire case hinges on proving that what happened outside that hookah lounge triggered a relentless multi-state conspiracy that Durk organized and financed from the top. FBI agent Jaron Farmby took the stand and read text logs pulled directly from Durk's devices from the hours right after Von was killed. In those texts, Durk told a close associate he felt dead inside. But hours later, those same texts show Durk sending surveillance footage of the fight directly to associates with messages about get back and retaliation. Prosecutors are not reading those texts as grief. They are reading them as the beginning of a plan. Then there is the Pissed Me Off music video, which prosecutors successfully argued to the judge was not just art but a literal call to arms directed at OTF to go after anyone connected to Von's death. And then the feds draw a straight line from November 2020 all the way to August 2022, when a 5-man hit squad was flown to Los Angeles to track down Quando Rondo. That tracking ended at a gas station shooting near the Beverly Center. Quando survived, but his cousin Xavier Robinson, known as Lil Pab, was shot through the torso and killed. The prosecution.
So this is the part we're talking about as far as when the vehicles got traced, but I don't want to interrupt too much. Let's go.
Is asking this jury to see all of it. The text, the music, the ambush, as one continuous premeditated campaign of revenge that started the night King Von took his last breath. But here's where it gets interesting. The defense does not dispute that Lil Durk was devastated by Von's death. They are not arguing that he was indifferent or unaffected. What they are arguing is that feeling grief and loss does not make someone the architect of a murder-for-hire conspiracy. Grief is not evidence of a crime. And the gap between emotional devastation in November 2020 and alleged organized retaliation operation in August 2022 is a gap the defense intends to keep as wide as possible in the jury's mind. Prosecutors have also introduced digital material showing what members of Durk's circle were discussing and sharing in the days and weeks after Von's death. Surveillance footage, messages, and other digital records have been used to reconstruct the atmosphere inside OTF following the shooting. The government's argument is that the conversations and communications from that period show an environment where retaliation was not just expected, but actively discussed. Among people connected to Durk, investigators have presented these communications as evidence of a sustained and coordinated emotional and organizational response to Von's death, rather than simply individuals expressing private grief. The defense argues that discussions are not plans, that expressing anger after losing a close friend and colleague is not the same as organizing a murder, and that the government is reading criminal conspiracy into conversations that reflect the ordinary and human response to an.
So what's going to be difficult about his situation is he could probably, some people are saying that, oh, he could get off on the homicide, right? But the conspiracy is going to be the hard part, because they're going to be like, oh, he knew these people, he connected these people. There's a text how he said, get things out of my name, blase, blase, that he has a motive,
to an extraordinary loss. That distinction between grieving and planning is one the jury will have to draw for themselves based on the specific content of what was actually said in those messages. Then there is the music. Prosecutors successfully argued for the admission of Lil Durk's Piss Me Off music video as trial evidence. The government's interpretation of portions of the song connects it to the emotional and retaliatory themes they say were present in Durk's life following Von's death. A visual element of the video involves imagery connected to Von Durk, wearing a chain with Von's nickname V-Roy, a shirt bearing Von's image, and audio of Von spliced into the track. Government witnesses have been prepared to testify about the environment where the video was filmed and its connection to the gang structure. Prosecutors say Durk used to build OTF. For the prosecution, the video is not just a music release. It is an artifact of the mental state they are trying to document. The defense has pushed back on this directly, and their argument matters beyond just this trial. They are raising a question that courts have been wrestling with increasingly across the country. When can a rapper's lyrics be introduced as evidence of criminal intent? The defense argues that rap music is an artistic medium that uses exaggeration, fictional persona, metaphor, and stylized violence as storytelling tools. A song about revenge or retaliation does not automatically describe a real plan. A lyric that expresses anger does not constitute a confession. The defense is asking the jury to evaluate the music within a context of artistic expression, rather than treating it as a literal account of Lil Durk's intentions. That disagreement over how to read a piece of music in a courtroom is one of the most culturally significant legal questions this trial is producing. Now, let's talk about Kevon Grant more specifically, because his position in this case is genuinely unusual. Grant is being used by the prosecution as a cooperating witness. He has pleaded guilty and is expected to testify about what he knows regarding the alleged murder-for-hire operation. But the defense is simultaneously pointing at Grant as the person who may have been responsible for the Los Angeles operation without Lil Durk's knowledge or authorization. The defense has argued that Grant used business resources connected to astronaut sounds and other company accounts to facilitate elements of the alleged operation, and that he did so on his own initiative without direction from Durk. That puts Grant in an extraordinary position within the trial. He is simultaneously one of the government's most important witnesses and the primary alternative suspect the defense is presenting to the jury. And the defense's use of King Von's dying question directed specifically at Grant is designed to make the jury see Grant's relationship to the original tragedy in a fundamentally different way than prosecutors have presented it. The defense is not simply attacking Grant's credibility as a witness in the routine way defense attorneys attack cooperating witnesses in federal trials. They are arguing that Grant had a deeper, more personal connection to the events of November 2020 than the government's narrative acknowledges. That he was present on the night Von died. That he shared a life with...
That I feel like honestly is a great defense, right? The fact that, hey, he was there when it happened. Durk wasn't there. Durk was far away. I feel like that could definitely help Durk's situation.
Von in the way that people who are genuinely close do, and that his presence in the middle of this story is not coincidental, but central. The defense wants the jury to ask whether the person with the most intimate relationship to King Von's death is the defendant sitting at the table or the witness about to take the stand. This is where the cooperating witness issue becomes absolutely central to understanding this trial. The defense has aggressively challenged the reliability of the government's cooperating witnesses across the board. Brian Steele, Lil Durk's lead defense attorney, has used the interview numbers to hammer this point in front of the jury. OTF Jam was interviewed approximately 30 times by investigators, but only 3 of those sessions were recorded. OTF Vonnie was interviewed approximately 10 times with none of those meetings recorded. Flacco was interviewed approximately 15 times with only 1 recorded session. Steele forced investigators to acknowledge these numbers on the stand, and the implications are significant. When someone is interviewed 30 times without recording, the question of whether their account stayed consistent, evolved under pressure, or was shaped by what investigators wanted to hear cannot be answered by the documentation that exists. That is not a minor detail. In a case where cooperating witness testimony is central to the prosecution's theory, the absence of recordings from the vast majority of those sessions is a structural vulnerability that Steele is exploiting with precision. Prosecutors respond to this challenge by pointing to the corroborating evidence that exists independently of witness testimony. Digital records do not change their stories between interviews. Financial transactions happen or they did not. Flight manifests either show travel or they do not. Surveillance footage captures what it captures. The government's argument is that the cooperating witnesses are not the only foundation of the case. They are one layer of a structure that includes documentary and digital evidence.
Because if you think about it, anybody who, like, let's say they got you, right? You're like, yo, I need someone to blame it on. Like, instead of me doing X amount of time, I can get it reduced. This person has a bigger name anyways, and they're probably looking for him. And I can play more of a victim round, like, oh, he coerced me into doing this, or I was in a financially bad spot. He said he was going to pay X, Y, and Z for me. If you remember when this whole thing first happened, people were talking about him giving people record deals, contracts, features, all type of stuff. So
evidence capable of standing on its own. Whether the jury finds that argument sufficient is one of the central questions that will determine the verdict. Let the full timeline sink in for a minute. November 2020, King Von is killed outside a hookah lounge in Atlanta. Lil Tim is charged and later the case is dismissed. Lil Durk and OTF are left to carry the grief of that loss, while the public watches and demands a response. The digital communications in the days that follow capture the emotional devastation inside Durk's circle. The Piss Me Off video becomes a document of the anger in the morning that followed. Meanwhile, according to prosecutors, something else is being organized. A plan to reach the people connected to Von's death. Then, August 19, 2022, a group connected to Lil Durk, according to the government's theory, travels to Los Angeles and executes an ambush near the Beverly Center targeting Quando Rondo. Quando survives. His cousin, Xavier Robinson, known as Lil Pab, does not. He is shot through the torso and killed. The medical examiner's testimony about those injuries was presented to the jury in clinical detail that the courtroom absorbed in silence. Then October 2024, Lil Durk is arrested. The federal indictment follows. And eventually the trial begins in Los Angeles, in the same city where Lil Pab was killed, where a jury is now being asked to determine whether the night King Von died in Atlanta truly set all of this in motion. Now this is where we got to address the central question this trial is ultimately asking. Was King Von's death the beginning of the retaliatory campaign prosecutors describe? Or is the government connecting events that are separated by nearly 2 years and filtered through cooperating witnesses whose accounts were developed across dozens of unrecorded meetings?
Here's the thing. Anyone can say things, right? But I mean, I'm still looking for some concrete proof, right? Some concrete proof. That's what we're asking for.
That question does not have an obvious answer. It is the question the jury is being paid to resolve. The prosecution's theory is coherent and emotionally compelling. A close friend and collaborator is killed. The person associated with the shooting faces no legal consequences. The community expects a response. The defendant's own communications show he was devastated and feeling the pressure of that expectation. And then, nearly 2 years later, an organized attack is carried out against the camp connected to Von's death. The narrative thread is clear, and the government has built their case around making it feel inevitable. The defense's theory is equally coherent, but requires the jury to look more carefully at the specific actors rather than the emotional arc. Yes, Von died. Yes, Durk was devastated. But devastation is not conspiracy. The person who actually organized the logistics, Grant, according to the defense, had his own deep personal connection to Von, his own presence on the night Von died, and his own...
And they were cousins, by the way. These two were cousins. So you can even see it in the picture there. They kind of look alike. So I feel like that's like a good reason for this person to be like, oh, it's just me. But at the same time. And by the way, the gentleman on the left, he's the only one in this whole equation who has never done any time. He doesn't have it. He has a clean record. Everyone else already has a record involved. So put that in context there.
Own response to Von's dying question. And if Grant acted without Durk's authorization, then the government has the right tragedy and the wrong defendant. For y'all who haven't thought about what it means to hear someone's final words presented as courtroom evidence 6 years after they died, let me put that in perspective. King Von has been gone since November 2020. The people who loved him have spent nearly 6 years carrying that loss, building memorials, releasing tribute music, and trying to process an ending that came too early and too violently. And now, in a federal courtroom in Los Angeles, those final moments have been extracted from that grief and placed on the record as evidence. The question he asked Grant in his final moments, "Why did you let me get shot?" is being analyzed by attorneys, presented to jurors, and debated in the context of a murder-for-hire prosecution. Whatever that question meant in the moment Von asked it, it now means something different in the courtroom. And that transformation is one of the more unsettling dimensions of how this trial is unfolding. At the end of the day, the title of this documentary describes something real, even if it does not describe a single documented moment of Lil Durk weeping in front of the jury. The emotional breakdown is not a single event in that courtroom. It is the accumulated weight of sitting through a federal trial where the worst night of your life is being used as the motive for a crime you say you did not commit, where the last words of someone you loved are being dissected by attorneys who never knew him, where the grief that you carried publicly and privately for years is now being presented to 12 strangers as evidence of your criminal intent. That is what breaking down in court actually looks like when you remove the dramatic framing and look at what is really happening in that room. It does not require a single visible moment of collapse. It does not require tears on camera or a moment that a courtroom sketch artist captures for the evening news. It just requires understanding what it means to sit there and listen, to hear the person you lost reduced to evidence, to hear their dying question read into the record, to hear 12 strangers evaluate what those words meant and whether they prove something about you. That is its own
He got good
kind of
storytelling abilities.
quiet interior and heavy in a way that does not photograph easily, but is no less real for the absence of documentation. The real question is whether that grief, that loss, and that connection to King Von ultimately proves what prosecutors say it proves, or whether the defense has done enough to convince the jury that they are looking at the wrong person for the wrong reasons. The answer to that question will determine whether Lil Durk walks out of that courthouse or spends the rest of his life inside the federal system that is now holding him accountable for a night that started with someone else's death nearly.
Yeah, so that's it as far as that until we get more information. It's a very sad situation. And by the way, there's a chance he may not do life. They're talking about, oh, either life or not it could be somewhere in between. Like I said, the conspiracy charge, it may not necessarily give him the whole thing, but a very sad situation for all parties involved. I wish everyone the best. Wanted to cover this real quick because I'm like, yeah, I keep seeing this on the internet, so I was like, why not? Yeah.